I now introduce to you the Honorable Colm Imbert, Member of Parliament for Martin Northeast.
Thank you very much, Chairman Hong, Dr. the Honorable Keith Rowley, Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago and Member of Parliament for Diego Martin West, the Honorable Darrell Smith, Minister of Sport and Member of Parliament for Diego Martin Central, my other cabinet colleagues, other parliamentarians, members of the Council of the Diego Martin Regional Corporation, constituents from the 3 constituencies of West, Central, and Northeast, other supporters of the PNM, friends. We've come to speak to you tonight as part of a public education series. We think it's necessary for we in the PNM to put the facts out into the public domain, and particularly to you, our members, and to the listening public, with respect to the reality of the financial situation in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, your PNM government has managed over the last 18 months to hold everything together, but it has been difficult. And let me explain what I mean by that. In 2014, when the price of oil was upwards of $100 a barrel, the revenue that Trinidad and Tobago earned from taxation was in the vicinity of $57 billion. Don't mind, they were spending more than 57. They were spending 60 and 61 and 62 billion at that time. But the revenue from income tax, corporation tax, value-added tax, petroleum taxes, and so on, customs duty, was $57 billion. And then in 2015, the following year, in the election year, in desperation, the previous government agreed to a number of wage and salary increases, which had the effect of increasing annual expenditure by several $billion dollars, and also creating a back pay liability for the incoming PNM government of somewhere in the vicinity of $5 billion, most of which, by the grace of God, we have been able to pay. That was not easy to do. But the reason why I started off by saying that our revenue in 2014 was $57 billion, and I'm repeating that, our revenue today is $37 billion. So we have dropped from $57 billion in tax revenue to $37 billion. That is a reduction of $20 billion, $20,000 million. But the country is still running. It's not easy, but the country is still running. But I want you to understand, if you're running a small business and your income dropped by 40%, what would happen to your business? You would have to cut expenses. You'd have to cut staff. You'd have to reduce a lot of things. But we, your PNM government, have been able to manage this storm without too much discomfort and too much dislocation. And our priority is keeping people in jobs and keeping people at work. So I want you to understand what is happening. So we have a $20 billion loss in revenue between 2014 and today. And when you look at oil revenues in particular, oil revenues, that is not other taxes, value-added tax, income tax, personal income tax, customs duty, just dealing with income from oil alone. In 2014, the income from oil was $18 billion, closer to 19. And in 2016, 1.7. Try and understand what we're dealing with. We had almost $19 billion every year, this country, from oil and gas, which has dropped to less than $2 billion. So out of that $20 billion we lost, 17 billion of it came from oil. So we have lost 17 billion, 17,000 million dollars in government revenue per year between 2014 and 2016. I think it's necessary for people to understand the facts, the difficult circumstances we find ourselves in. So between 2014 and 2016, we had a drop in revenue of some $20 billion. Oil revenue dropped by $17 billion. But that was not the only problem. The other problem that we had was oil production fell. Oil production fell from about 100,000 barrels per day in 2010 to 66,000 barrels per day in 2016. So that was a 30% drop in oil production. Gas production dropped from 4.2 billion standard cubic feet per day to 3.2 billion standard cubic feet per day, a drop of 25%. So this is what your PNM administration has been faced with. We have a collapse in oil prices. Oil prices dropped from over $100 a barrel in 2014 down to as low as $28 a barrel in 2016. In February or March of 2016, oil prices dropped as low as $27 a barrel. And gas prices, which were up in the region of $12 and $13 per MMBTU back in the good old days in 2007, 2008, dropped to below $2 per MMBTU. So I'm giving you a scenario to understand what your PNM government is facing. And faced with that scenario and faced with our manifesto promise that we will do whatever we can to keep people in jobs, to keep the country running, to ensure the payment of old age pension, to ensure the payment of welfare benefits, to ensure that the school feeding program continues, to ensure that all of your services are provided to you, and those who are most in need get assistance from the state. There are a number of things we as a responsible government have to do. We have to look for new revenue sources. But it's not all bad. I want to remind you that in our first budget, we fulfilled a manifesto promise of the PNM that we would increase the personal allowance for income tax from $60,000 per year to $72,000 a year. Or if I put it in dollars per month, we increased the personal allowance from $5,000 a month to $6,000 per month. And so, if you were earning $6,000 a month or less, because we fulfilled a manifesto promise, you pay no income tax. So there are a number of manifesto promises that we made. We promised to reduce the rate of VAT from 15% to 12.5%, which we have done. We promised to increase the cap on pensions, because if you are in receipt of national insurance benefits and old age pension, previously you could only get a total of $4,500 combined from the two. So you were getting $3,000 in national insurance and $1,500 in old age pension. We put in our manifesto that in order to help the elderly, that we would increase the cap to $5,000. And we implemented that manifesto promise. So there are a number of things that your PNM government pledged to do. We pledged to make everybody who earns $6,000 or less free of income tax. We did that. We promised to reduce VAT from 15% to 12.5%. We did that. We promised to increase the cap on pensions from 4,500 to 5,000. We did that. So it means now an elderly person who is getting both NIS and old age pension will receive 3,000 NIS and $2,000 in pension, an increase of $500 per person. And there are thousands of these people. This was at serious cost to the state, because every time you provide a benefit, every time you provide a tax waiver, a tax exemption, an increase in a benefit, it causes the state to lose revenue. But this country has serious problems. It needs serious solutions from serious people to solve the problem. So one of the things we said we would do, and we didn't hide, and we didn't pretend like the other side, we indicated that a serious revenue stream that was available to the government had been lost or missed by the other side. And I heard someone on television tonight, a valuator before I came here, say that the loss of income to the state from land and building taxes over the last 7 years is upwards of $2.5 billion. And that is at the old rates. And that is where only half of the properties in Trinidad and Tobago are on the system. So we made no bones about it. We said we have to look at new revenue streams. And we indicated that we would be bringing back not bringing back because it was always there, it was never removed. And that's a point I want to make in a little while. That we would be implementing the law. Because a Property Tax Act was passed in 2009 by the Parliament. And when the new administration came in, because they had campaigned on a false axe the tax promise, they said that they are going to repeal the Property Tax Act. And in fact, contrary to their lies and their untruths, they did in fact in February of 2011 lay a piece of legislation in the Parliament to repeal the Property Tax Act and to enact a new Land and Building Taxes Act. That was in February of 2011. But they never completed that transaction. They allowed the Parliament to be prorogued in June of 2011, and they allowed that Land and Building Taxes Act to lapse. And 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, they just waived the payment of the tax. But contrary to their lies, they did not repeal the Property Tax Act. They left it on the books. And that land and building tax that they brought in February 2011 was 10 times worse than the Property Tax Act and 20 times worse than what was there before. I was just looking at it tonight, this bill that the other side brought to the Parliament in 2011, the Land and Building Tax Act of 2011. And you've heard them talking about how this PNM is going to sell your property. Lie. When you go into that 2011 legislation laid in the Parliament by the UNC, it had a provision in it that if you don't pay your land and building tax for 1 year, the government could forfeit your house. That is what the UNC put into the Parliament in 2011. You know what is in our Property Tax Act? It's a long procedure with notices spanning over a period of 5 years, 5 years, in our Property Tax Act, that if a property owner receives a notice of assessment of his tax and he refuses to pay, he would get a warning. He refuses to pay, he will get a notice. And it goes on and it goes on, and it says in our law that if you fail to adhere to the procedures in the law, after 5 years, then the state has a right to initiate a process for the forfeiture of your property. But under their legislation, those liars, they had put in legislation that after 1 year, they could come and take your house. You see why I have to listen to these political hypocrites talking their nonsense? That Ramadar fellow has a condominium in Fort Lauderdale, and he pays $17,000 a year. And he talks some nonsense the other day, how I use parliamentary privilege to talk about his condominium. Well, they say no parliament here. I'm outside. I have come outside. And I'm telling them liars that that man pays $17,000 a year for a little condominium in Fort Lauderdale. And he happy to pay it, glad to pay it. But when you take that same little condominium in Fort Lauderdale that he owns, and you put it into Trinidad and Tobago, in a similar neighborhood, the tax on that same little condominium that he paying $17,000 a year for in Fort Lauderdale is $1,000. And he want to pay that. So he go pay Uncle Sam. You see how these people unpatriotic? So he go pay North America $17,000 for a little condo, but he wouldn't pay Trinidad and Tobago $1,000 a year, $80 a month for the similar property in Trinidad and Tobago. And while I'm at that, I did some worked examples in terms of what the impact of the property tax is on typical properties in Trinidad and Tobago, because these people could lie. I hear them talking about if you have a property, you might have to pay as much as $60,000 in property tax. Lie. I did some calculations on a typical 3-bedroom house in Diamond Vale, because we are in Diamond Vale. And the typical rental value of a 3-bedroom house, an average house, average condition, on an average street in Diamond Vale, the monthly rental might be somewhere between $4,000 and $5,000 a month. But I used $5,000 a month as the average monthly rental of a 3-bedroom house, average house on an average street in average condition. And when you calculate that $5,000 a month to work out the annual value, you get $60,000. That is not the tax, eh? That is what them liars trying to make you believe. That $60,000 is not the tax, eh? That is the annual rental value. And it is multiplied by a percentage to get the tax. So you take that $60,000 in rental value, and the law then reduces that by 10%. So that will go down to $54,000 a year. And then you apply the percentage for property tax on residential properties, 3%. 3% by $54,000, you get $1,620 per year. So that would be the property tax on a house in Diamond Vale that might attract a rental of about $5,000. If I go to Carenage and I take a property, $3,500, the annual tax drops to about $1,300. If I go to River Estate and I take a typical small house from the original development in River Estate, you know, our house would be over 20 years old now, much older than that actually, 30, 40 years old. Say $3,000 a month. Multiply that by 12, 36,000. Take away 10%, you drop back down to 32,000 plus, and then you take 3% of that, your tax is $1,000 a year, $80 a month. But then if I go to Goodwood Park, and I look at a typical property in Goodwood Park that is renting for $20,000 a month, your tax will work out close to $7,000 a month. So the man in Goodwood Park, a year. Let me just get these figures straight. Property in Goodwood Park renting for $20,000 a month will attract an annual tax of $240,000. You reduce that by 10%, so that comes down to $216,000. And then you multiply that by 3%, you get just over $6,000 per year for the big shot property in Goodwood Park. But you, the small man in River Estate, you're paying $1,000. So that is why the former Minister of Finance, my predecessor, Hawaii, could have said in his 2014 budget address that he intends to introduce property tax. All of you may have seen the thing on WhatsApp. You see the video from 2014 with Hawaii talking that they plan to introduce it. But what was important, he said it was a good and fair tax. You know why it's fair? Because the little man will pay $80 a month. The big shot might end up paying $500, $600 a month in property tax for his house. That is fair. So those who could afford pay more, and those who can't afford pay less. So what is $80 a month? That is not $60,000 or $20,000 that these criminals want to make you believe. And then let's go further. Let's take the example of a shopping mall with 100 shops. What do you think the property tax is on that? $3 million. So understand, the man with the shopping mall, he will pay $3 million a year in property tax. The guy in River Estate with the little house, he will pay $1,000 a year. And the man in Goodwood Park will pay $6,000 per year. So all these Nancy stories that they have outside there about tax, and this tax is wicked. When you go and you look at the history, the Land and Building Tax Act dates back to 1920. I have a copy of it here. Land and Building Tax Act, Chapter 7604. Act number 14 of 1920. Almost 100 years ago, this land and building tax was in existence in Trinidad and Tobago. And I've checked the records. Land and building taxes have been collected in Trinidad and Tobago since the year 1818, for almost 200 years, because it was always recognized that any tax that is based on the value of your property has to be in favor of the poor man, and the rich man has to pay more because he has more. And that is the whole philosophy behind property tax. And now let me explain the present procedure. The problem with this law that has been there since 1920 is that, like many laws in Trinidad and Tobago, it just stayed on the books, was not implemented. So right now we have a situation where there are approximately 400,000 residential properties in Trinidad and Tobago, and less than 200,000 of these properties are on the system. There are 200,000 houses, and I would dare say houses of a particular type and houses of a particular class. And I'm not talking working class. I'm talking in the higher bracket. There are 200,000 houses that are not on the system. There are people with large houses who pay $100 a year in property tax because the rolls were never updated. So one of the problems with this law, the reason why people are unfamiliar with it, is because although it's been on the books in different forms since 1920, it has not been implemented. So there was never any regular updating of the law. never any publication of the rolls, because that is one of the benefits that will now come out of this system as we seek to implement a law that has been on our books in one form or fashion for almost 100 years. Because these valuation rolls that give the value of a property have to be published. It has to be public information the same way. I could go into the register of properties in Fort Lauderdale, go on the internet and search, and I will find in Fort Lauderdale Prakash Ramadar property. We have to start doing that in Trinidad and Tobago. That is what the law requires to be done. Too many people in this country getting away with not paying taxes. And I started off my speech by indicating what we found ourselves in. And let me tell you something, no matter how hard it is, I mean, this year, our budget is 53 billion, 52, 53 billion. Our income is 37 billion. We're short about 15 to 16 billion dollars this year. We have to borrow some. We can't print money. We can't make money out of nowhere. So we have to borrow some, so that we have undertaken to borrow about $6 billion out of that 16. And the other 10 billion, we have to make it up somehow. And this is why we have public offerings like that, First Citizens Bank public offering. We have another one coming up. TTNGL, also known as Phoenix Park, will be coming out soon. And we have to find ways and means as a government to make up that gap. Because if we borrow more than $6 billion, you see what is happening to our credit rating? The international agencies are telling us that we can't continue to load up the country with debt, because we were gifted with a lot of debt from the last administration, and we have been forced to do some borrowing ourselves. But the international agencies are telling us we have to cut expenditure. If we listen to them, you understand, you have a very caring government. If we listen to them, they tell us devalue the dollar to 10 to 1. That's the first recommendation they make. We ain't bother with them. You could imagine what would happen in Trinidad and Tobago if we did that. The social unrest that would cause. So we ain't doing that. They tell us cut public servants' salaries. You know what will happen if we do that? We ain't doing that. They tell us raise water rates and electricity rates. Let me not talk about that. They tell us cut out subsidies and transfers, cut free education. They say stop gate. Cut all your social welfare programs. We have not done what they want us to do. Because if we did what they want us to do, there would be total chaos in Trinidad and Tobago. We came into government on a promise that we would do our best to be better than the lot that was there before. That we would try to manage the country properly. That we would try to make sure that those who are most in need would get assistance from the state. And I dare say, by and large, over the last 18 months, we have kept our promise. And we're going to continue to keep our promise. But we can't just turn a blind eye. I mean, another matter is the gambling and gaming industry. When I came in and I had meetings with the Board of Inland Revenue, they told me there are over 100 gambling establishments in Trinidad and Tobago. 125. I'm sure it have about 200 now. If you go down south, every shop have a slot machine in it. And they're not paying tax. And they told us, Board of Inland Revenue told us, that out of those 125, they're collecting tax from 5. That has to stop. It has to stop. And you see, every time we move to do what is right, we're going to get a pushback. Because as we move to regulate the gaming and gambling industry and bring it within the confines of the law so that they will declare their income, they will pay their taxes, we're going to get a pushback. Because this is a particular industry. In fact, Trinidad and Tobago is distinguished by being one of the few countries in the Western Hemisphere that has an unregulated gambling and casino industry. When the international agencies write about us, when the Attorney General goes to deal with money laundering and terrorist financing and so on, one of the points always made by the international agencies is that Trinidad and Tobago is unique. We have a huge gambling and gaming industry where maybe $10 billion a year passes through. And the government collects a pittance and the industry is not regulated. We have to get what taxpayers of this country are entitled to from all of these informal industries that are operating outside of the law. Because if we don't do that, crapo spoke your pipe. And this is why I put it in the context of the property tax. So let me go back to what we are doing. The first stage of the property tax procedure is to invite property owners to submit a form telling the valuation division some information about their property. Now it's very simple. Your name, your address, the purpose that the property is being used for, the number of rooms, and if you look on the Ministry of Finance website, that relates to the number of bedrooms. That is one of the frequently asked questions on the Ministry of Finance website. So when they say the number of rooms, they mean the number of bedrooms. So I'm clarifying that tonight, although my officers have been out in the media clarifying the same thing. And then they ask you to estimate the rental value of your property. And if you can't estimate it, don't pay somebody to do that for you. If you feel unable to estimate the rental value of your property, there's no requirement on you to put something in that section in the form. But if you don't, there's a danger that if you leave the form blank or you leave sections of the form blank, the valuation division will not have sufficient information to value your property. And you will get a visit. And this is why I'm encouraging people, if you want this thing to go through smoothly, comply with the law and fill out the form. And all of those documents that the valuation division asks for, your building plan, your deed, etc., they are only required to assist the valuation division to understand your property. But they are not mandatory. And if you look, there's an advertisement from the Ministry of Finance that has come out in the last couple of days where the valuation division has indicated that once you get an old land and building taxes receipt, a utility bill, and if you're the owner and you have a deed, that is sufficient. But the problem is, if you have other documents and you are able to send them in, it will assist the process. It will make life easy. Because the valuation division has other records. It has WASA records. It has TNTech records. It has aerial photography. It has election and boundaries information. So I don't expect people from these three constituencies to take basket from the other side and not submit the form. I don't expect you to do that. I'm advising you to do it. And all that form does is it produces a record of the owner of a particular house. Because we've started with residential properties. We haven't gone to commercial yet. We haven't gone to industrial. And let me tell you something. The income from industrial and commercial is going to be substantial. But we've started off with residential because the rolls contain at least 200,000 residential properties already. So there will be people already have an assessment number, which will make it very easy for the valuation division to do an estimate of your annual rent and work out what your tax will be. So if you have an old land and building taxes receipt, you have a utility bill for proof of address, send it in with the form, and it makes life easy. After the 22nd of May, after we collect all the forms that we have received, then the valuation division will begin the process of assessing the value of the properties in order to prepare something called the valuation roll. And the valuation roll is simply a publicly available list of all properties in Trinidad and Tobago with information on the property. And after the valuation role is completed, or once it's reached a particular stage of development, then the Board of Inland Revenue will send each property owner a notice indicating to you that your property has been assessed for tax. This is the tax. And you will be given a period of time, I think it's 30 days, to object or pay the tax. And if you object, there's a process it goes through. But I also heard a professional valuator on television tonight make private person. He doesn't support the government. He's a very independent man, private valuator, who said, look, I suggest you fill out those forms and send them in. And here's the reason why. He said if you're going to raise a mortgage loan on your property, one of the things that the bank will ask you for is a land and building taxes receipt. And if you refuse to fill out the form and you don't have one, then you are going to have difficulties. So I expect that sensible people will understand that this is in your best interest. I expect so. It is in your best interest. And the point I'm making is that we really need the revenue. We don't want to enter into a situation where we have to take drastic measures. We haven't taken any drastic measures so far. I heard the other side complaining about the millionaire tax. How could that possibly be a drastic measure? How many millionaires you have in Trinidad and Tobago? There are plenty on their side. That's why they vex with the millionaire tax. But the millionaire tax only applies to a person whose chargeable income after deduction of expenses is $1 million or more. How many people in this room income is $1 million? Very few, if any. I think I might have one on the side there. Just joking. But the point is, the millionaire tax does not apply to your ordinary citizen. It does not apply to 95% of people in Trinidad and Tobago. And we put in that millionaire tax because we felt that it was time for the burden of adjustment to be spread across the entire society. It's about time. So that we had done some things, we had raised the price of fuel, and we know that had an effect on people at the lower end. So we felt it was time for people at the upper end to pay their fair share. And that's why we increased the taxes on luxury vehicles as well. If you want to own a big Mercedes-Benz, pay the tax. So we have done a number of things, and this property tax falls into exactly that same scenario of equity and fairness. I've made the point that the man in Goodwood Park will be paying 6 times more tax than the man in River Estate or Carenage. What's unfair about that? That is fair. It is a fair and equitable and just tax. So I hope I have dealt with some of the misconceptions, but I don't expect the lies to stop. You heard the first lie. They tried to repeal the property tax, but the public servants stopped them. Lie. Because they came to Parliament with a law, and they allowed it to lapse. Then before that, even before one of them say that, the next one say, we did repeal the tax. Lie. They left the Property Tax Act on the books unchanged. They ain't changed a single thing. Total lie. And then they're lying about the amount of tax. I want to repeat the examples. A person in an ordinary house in River Estate, his or her tax will be about $1,000 a year, $80 a month. Whereas the man with the shopping mall, he will have to pay $3 million. And that could only be fair. And you understand the pushback we get in. Because there are a lot of people who haven't been paying tax for a long time. And it's not the little people. But don't let me go there. Okay? So I just wanted to explain all of this to you. I hope you better understand. And you have to understand your government cares about you. It cares about you. It's doing its best. That's why we increased the personal allowance. That's why we increased the cap on pensions. That's why we reduced VAT to 12.5%. We care about you. And it is because we care about you that we have to seriously address the serious problems that this country has in terms of income and expenditure. And we have to manage the country properly, responsibly, not recklessly, not taking all the money out of the National Gas Corporation, not borrowing all the money, not bankrupting the Treasury. We have no intention of doing that because we want this country to prosper. When things get better, we want to be able to give you something. This is what your PNM government is famous for. When things are good, we give you things. So I ask you for patience. I ask you to bear with your PNM government, and I ask you to understand the difficult situation that we find ourselves in. Thank you very much.